So pleased to be joined by a unique cult figure in pro wrestling history, my old buddy. It's Jameson, also known as John DiGiacomo. John, welcome to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations.
How are you, Phil? Thanks for having me, bud.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm excited to get the story of Jameson and you out to a new kind of platform here, too. So let's start with a description from you on who Jameson is and how he came to be.
Okay.
I know it, but I think it's better coming from you.
Okay. So I was doing stand-up, and friends of mine started this murder mystery company, which was 50% scripted scenes and 50% improvisation. And I'm not an actor. I wasn't an actor at that point. And they took me on because of my improv ability, because you do interact with the audience. Long story short, I became this playing Jameson, this huge media locally, not nationwide. And Vince McMahon came to one of our shows and said, "That's the guy I need to go toe to toe with Bobby, because my success at that show was my improv ability to talk to the customers coming to see the show, the audience, and interact with them and all that." And I know Vince thought I was hilarious. I had him beat red a couple times, and sure enough, that was a Saturday night, and Monday, WWF called the producers to say, "How do we get in touch with this guy?" And that's how this character that I never knew I had, because I was pretty macho, buff, during my short comedy stint up until that point. And this guy was a total pathetic nerd, and it was the only role that they hadn't cast yet. And I said, "I can't play a nerd. You got to get a really good actor." And especially because I helped them write the show. And I showed up. They said, "Just come to the first rehearsal." And I just put a pair of glasses on, crossed my eyes, and found this inner pathetic person. And it was great. And I've had some great moments with it. Did I answer the question? That was a really
You
long.
did. That's who Jameson is. And I guess who is John DiGiacomo? Because you mentioned that was like kind of your first acting gig. So
Yeah,
what made you get involved in acting? And it's kind of crazy that it kind of led you straight into the WWF in 1989.
Really. Again, I mean, well, out of school, I was a benefits pension consultant. Wall Street money, but I was like not winning the war that some people go through in their 20s, of keeping life in perspective and staying away from drugs and alcohol, and I didn't really succeed at that. And I just thought at one point, I'm gonna die unless I stop doing this. And people have been telling me my whole life, well, I should be a stand-up comic, because I would always take over rooms and stuff. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I had some money saved, and I went out and tried my hand at stand-up. And my friends put me in the show I just talked about for 20 minutes. And Vince came. And even when I was first at WWF, I didn't really think about acting. I was wondering when I could get back to my stand-up career. And because it became somewhat consuming to be under contract to them and still be able to book gigs and all that. And then, kind of the industry kind of approached me. Do you have representation? And they got me to go out on a couple of commercial auditions, and I booked my second audition, and then I thought, you know what? I gotta learn how to be an actor because it's so much more money than stand-up comedy, unless you're, you know, Jim Gaffigan, who I adore. But if you're not that, you know, it's a really tough go, stand-up comedy. And suddenly this acting gig was, I didn't need a part-time job. I didn't have to be a bartender, until later on. But not a bartender, but had to get another job.
So you were the co-host on what was a, kind of an experimental thing that the WWF did, which was the Bobby Heenan Show, which aired after primetime wrestling in the most PG manner you're able to. How much fun was the Bobby
Uh,
Heenan Show to pull off?
you know, it was the very first thing I ever did for them on camera. And you know, I was intimidated. There was, you know, all these wrestling icons in the room. Some not on camera anymore, but who have advanced to Vince's hierarchy, executively speaking. And it was just very intimidating. But I just, you know, went with it, and it was so much fun. Bobby was, oh my God, he was a love. He really appreciated me. I know he thought I was good with him, that I fed him, and it was just more fun than, you know, you can imagine. That, like, especially when we would go to commercial. Yeah, Bobby was great. We had a lot of fun, got to know each other beyond our wrestling gigs. And it was just so much fun. And you know, how they did it. Like, we were shocked that they canceled it. I know you know, all the people from Vince down were real happy with it. It was a laugh. I mean,
Yeah.
But at that point, USA controlled content,
Right.
and they put the hammer down on it. Nah, done. Don't do that anymore. So, but I have all of those videos. Excuse me. On VHS. Like, after every show, they would mail me a tape in a WWF logo cassette holder, plastic. I got every show I ever did on VHS. They should be worth money.
Yeah, they should be. I'll say too. After he died,
Oh,
I got to meet Bobby Heenan one time, and he was amazing. The one time that I met him back in 2004, I mean, literally, you just meet him, and he holds court with you for 20-25 minutes, and it was
so
just
how
so quick.
was he? Yeah, 2004. He was still healthy.
He had recovered from the throat cancer at that point, was in remission, but I mean, he was sharp as a tack. It was amazing. I mean, literally, it was like a live stand-up act, like right in front of
Yeah.
you. I was going to a signing with a couple of friends of mine when his first book came out, and we actually completely missed the signing because somebody was running late. So then I walk into the bookstore, which was Bookends out in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And I was like, oh, I got to go at least get a copy for my friend that I told him I would pick one up for him. So I walk into the bookstore, and who's in the bookstore standing by himself looking at board games but Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he
Wow.
just said, get your friends out of the car. He's like, I'm waiting for a ride right now anyway. I'll talk to you guys. We got to sit down and talk with him for about 25, 30 minutes, and it was absolutely incredible. But I was
Yeah.
going to say the one thing that came out mostly about him after he died is people started referring to him, saying that he may have actually been the most talented person in the history of pro wrestling, because he was a good wrestler. He was, and probably the best at two different things, one of which was managing at ringside, and the other was commentary. And it's just such an amazing, amazing talent. Would you agree that he was probably the most talented guy you came across?
Never mind. I can't. There's not even, and no disrespect to anyone else, There's not even a close second.
Yep.
That's how good he was. He's probably the only guy, personality, that I met in my 3 years there. He's probably the only guy that, if he chose Hollywood instead of wrestling, he'd have been big. Also, not that he would look, not saying he would have been bigger than he was a bad career move, but he was that talented. Would have been great in movies if he concentrated on that. Would have been great in anything. I'm telling you, Bobby was so funny that he could have been a really effective dramatic actor. And I say that because comedy is so much harder as an actor than drama. And he, like, how he kept a straight face and do that. I mean, he was a talented guy. My biggest kicks, I swear to you, one of the things that pops into my mind the most about looking back on my years was my most fun times were when I broke Bobby and we had a reshoot. And it happened at least once a show. And he didn't break me. He didn't ever break me. And it's just a different mindset that I had. It was much easier because he was the engine. I was the fan belt. I don't know. There's not enough great words to say about Bobby and his talent. And beyond that, just the sweetest, the nicest guy. He was always so good to me. And I love that he enjoyed talking about life away from the studio. And and he'll always be. And my biggest sorrow is that the last time I saw Bobby was probably 93. Even though I went back to do a couple promos and the magazine and stuff, I never saw him in those years. But the last time I saw him was 93. And the next time I saw him, he was already at a point where he couldn't talk. And he wrote wrote notes to his wife, and she would say what he was thinking. And he signed his book. I have an autographed copy of his book on that day. And then he was gone less than a year later. And I've gotten to see Vince, which is another great story, for the first time after 20 years, probably even more, less than 25, but more than 20. Another great story. And I haven't seen anyone in all the years since 95, the last time I was there. I haven't seen anyone until 7 or 8 years ago when I saw Vince. And then I saw a lot of people. It was great.
Yeah. I thought it was the funniest thing when I kind of found you back in 2010.
Oh my God.
Basically, I had heard that Jameson was the actor comedian Andy Kindler, and I was like, wow, this is great. We finally found who he is. And then Andy Kindler himself kind of spoke up and said, yeah, no, I'm not. And the odd thing about that is I ended up following Andy Kindler and he followed me. We were talking to each other a little bit, but he was very confused by the credit. And then, ended up with help from some fans and some people who lived in New York, pinpointing where you were at that point. And Joe Bruen, who does the New England Hall of Fame, was kind of doing the same thing because he was trying to find unique guests for his what he promotes every year too. So, what was it like to kind of dip your toes back into the wrestling world once Jameson sort of resurfaced again?
It was like I had been tipped off probably a couple of years before what you're referring to, that there was this search for who Jameson is by friends of mine. And, I never, it's funny, Andy Kindler didn't want to take credit for it. And I was in no rush to either. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but I wasn't in a place then to like go online and somebody would send me a link to Andy's IMDb page where it says that he was Jameson and aren't you going to do something about this? And I was like, yeah, no, I mean, I don't know Andy, but I'm sure somebody else put that up. I was not. Then somebody got my work email and sent a nasty email to Andy saying, how dare you take, but making it, he got my email. It sounded like it came from me. But I've spoken to Andy and we're Facebook friends and we had a great catch up not too long ago. And yeah, it's all good. But finally, what happened was I was running a club in New York City. And these comedians came. I used to book the comics and the music, and these comics came in, wanted to produce a show there, and we're talking, and somehow Jameson came up from me, of course, and they were like, "Get out!" They happen to be wrestling fan comedians, and said, "Can we put you on our poster on our website to promote our show?" And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, and I'll make an appearance, but they wanted to do a special appearance by Jameson, WWF. And I said, but I'm not going to get up there as Jameson. I'll get up and welcome the crowd or bring me up there. I'll say a few things, and yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And because of that poster, and Phil, I don't know how you found that, but Joe happened to be, I don't know, that he had some link if like keyword searches or WWF searches, that he would get access to whatever anybody was posting. And you called and said, I want to meet you and write about, and he called and said, we want to bring you up to give you a special reward at the Hall of Fame. And I was like, and here's another like real regret I have, is that it took until 10 years ago for me to really get how much wrestling fans appreciated my character. When I was doing it, I gave my all. I try to be funny. I try to, make a point, but I was looking at it as an acting job and not as how great it was to be. I didn't recognize at that time how great wrestling fans are. And when I left the WWF, for me, it was somewhat of a relief that I can now pursue acting full time and not be tied down, and never realizing, just how big that was to a worldwide audience. Not that I was a superstar or anything, but because I was this, weird, cultish character, there were tens of thousands of people that really were curious about who Jameson was. Where is he? What's going on? And that's been a beautiful thing, but a regret that I didn't recognize his popularity, not, in that cult following. I didn't recognize it when I was actually doing it.
For me, it was just interesting as somebody who's, I mean, I followed wrestling since I'm, 4 or 5 years old. It was mostly because, you kind of appeared on the scene sort of out of nowhere, sort of off everybody's radar. And then, you were the one guy that, like, I didn't have a track on. It was kind of like, I don't know whatever happened to this guy. And with my job at the time, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try, because why not? So I think what I ended up getting was actually a comment on the blog that I wrote looking for you, of somebody who saw you at that club you were at the time, and said, hey, this is the guy. He's the events manager at this location. Reach out to him. So that was when I ended up connecting with you on email, and then got your phone number, and then did the story. What I'm curious from you,
and you visited from
did.
all the way upstate. You came down to the nightclub, to the bar.
Yeah,
that was awesome. I still have that picture.
I do too.
And you brought your buddy,
John.
John. Yeah. How did I forget that? John.
Yeah. What parallel? I'm actually going to see him this weekend too. What parallels do you find? You have a theater and an acting background now. What parallels do you find between theater and acting and pro wrestling? I think a lot of it is the same. The more I think about it, it's the levels of comfort performing, guys getting typecast. I think a lot of old school wrestling people wouldn't necessarily like it, but it's entertainment at the end of the day, and that's why a character like yours works. What do you see as kind of like the same, and what's different?
I don't think there's anything different. Even when you're doing a scripted scene, there's so much variety you could bring to those words. And improv it's everything. And that was wrestling. It was all improvisation. There were guys that were great in the ring, athletic and well built, and just had great names, but when they got in front of the microphone, they just weren't. There was just a handful that were really, and this was me observing as I'm standing backstage and I'm on, and there were just some people that were great in the ring, but those that were good in front of the mic too, were guys that could have made it in the business as actors. And there's some I have in my head that were great, and then there were the ones that you didn't really see on the mic. You didn't really. But anyway, that's the parallel, is that the guys that were really good on camera were the guys that had an acting talent, whether they had studied it or not. It could, most people are born with something that if they choose that line of work and study it, they become great actors. And there's definitely a parallel there.
Who's somebody that you worked with back then in the WWF, other than Bobby Heenan, of course, who you kind of saw as having the full package entertainment-wise when you were there?
Wow, Ted
DiBiase.
Ted and Sherry.
Oh, sensational Sherry.
And I think, Ted's great. Sherry was so good that she made Ted even better. Yep. And they were, when I say knew when and when they had to turn it on, were always good. Mr. Perfect. He was just so sarcastic and wry, and I mean, I thought it was hysterical. I think he was underused, if I had to be honest with you.
And he was great.
He was hilarious and great. Hacksaw was good. um, you know, what's funny is Brett was good, but he seemed to get these golden opportunities to. Um, Brett wasn't a guy off, um, like the guys that I'm mentioning. They were funny off camera.
Mm-hmm.
Brett was just the ultimate professional that did well in any situation. You know what I mean? Like he looked good. He was very athletic. When he was a heel, he was a great heel. When he was a good guy, he was a good guy. Everybody who didn't love Bret Hart.
Yeah.
So he stands out in a slightly different way, just being the most all around. Ted was great, yeah, I mean, Ted and Sherry, that they used to crack me up, even when I wasn't working with them. If I was in the green room or watching them set up, well, like we did this episode of where Jameson during prime time, Jameson got the $1 million belt stuck around his waist, and he was in the audience, and he was wearing a bathrobe because he couldn't hide the belt. And leading up to the last moments of the show where they find me, they find the belt on me. Leading up to all that, all the like break-ins to them freaking out that somebody stole the belt. Those moments, knowing them when they're not on camera, how funny it was to watch them, freak out. They were awesome. I loved them. And I'll give you a guy who probably could have been a great actor, who was so different than what he portrayed. But Mike Rotundo, IRS, that was a great gimmick. I thought it was a great gimmick. And he was so not like that guy. But if he didn't sell it every single time, he was another one that I really respected their acting ability.
And I'm going to move to him a little bit now, too. So I'm at Extreme Rules 2014 at the Meadowlands years ago, and we'd known each other for a little while at that point. And then I realized, this little kid looks really familiar to me that's singing Whole World in His Hands with Bray Wyatt and John Cena. And then I realized later on that night, that's your son making his WWE debut as the child in that segment with Bray Wyatt and John Cena. For the listeners who might not have been around wrestling as long as some of us, Bray Wyatt is Wyndham Rotunda, which is actually the son of Mike Rotunda.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you to be back in that environment that day?
Well, first of all, I had no influence at all over my son getting that gig. We were actually leaving for LA Monday morning, and we got the call Friday night from his agent that WWE called, and they want our best 8 to 10-year-old for their pay-per-view event. And he was amongst 100 plus clients of theirs. He was killing it at that time. He was in a big movie that was up for an Academy Award. He was a Disney kid. He played Kevin James' son. Like, he was red hot. And he was the first call. They called me and said, you guys interested? It's Sunday night, and it's right in Jersey. And I was first feeling like, yeah, I don't want to do this because we got to be on a plane the next morning, and these pay-per-view events run late. But I thought about the connection. How could I deprive my son of living what, at least for one night, what I lived these productions? And I'm thinking they want him for a promo. I had no idea what it was for. So I said, yeah, all right, well, maybe they'll shoot it and we can get the hell out of there and get on our plane the next morning. And when we get there, Vince comes right over. He gets down on one knee and to James and explains what he's going to be doing. And Little by little, I'm hearing this is the feature match, and they're going to put Are You Afraid of the Dark? We're going to stick you under the mat before the match begins, and then somebody's going to tap you, and you're going to come out, and you're going to do that, blah, 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 blah. And he gets all done with James. And he looks up at me because he's down on one knee. Otherwise, he'd be looking down on me. He says, "You must be the father." I said, "Yeah, Vince. You don't recognize me?" He said, "You look really familiar." So I made the Jameson face, which is basically this. And he was like, we hadn't seen each other. That was, what year was that?
2014.
Okay, so we hadn't seen each other in 20 years, probably a little more than 20 years. And he gave me a hug. He said, I got to bring you to the truck. There's people there that remember you, that is still working here. And it was a great night. My son had done a really famous NFL commercial leading up to that. And it was airing on every football game. And when word got out, that's the kid from the commercial, I swear to you, wrestlers were coming up to him and asking, I kid you not. He loved the Bella twins. They flipped out over him. It was so great. Can't even tell you. And I was getting texts all night from friends of mine that are wrestling fans that, did I just see what I think I saw? Did all these texts? It was really a great experience. It stunk getting up in the morning to get on our flight, but it was a really great experience.
That's fantastic. So I want to ask you about three different people that I'd like to get opinions on, kind of your interactions with them. And you could do them which way you want and order wise. But I want to hear about Vince McMahon. I want to hear about Gorilla Monsoon. And I want to hear about Kevin Dunn, because I feel like you probably had some interactions with all three of those guys. And there's so much out there about all of them at different points. So just if you can kind of summarize those guys for me.
Okay, so Gorilla, just such a lovely man. I mean, a heart of gold. I think really appreciative of the wrestling business and what it meant for him and his lifestyle and livelihood, and just a genuinely, not a mean bone in his body, and worthwhile as a off camera and on camera. Served his purpose beautifully for Vince in terms of commentating, being a foil for Bobby. So yeah. Now, the one thing is, even though he was around a lot, we never really worked together. I can't, other than him commentating on any of my matches, which was only about a third of my, I was only with the Bushwhackers probably for less than a third of my time there. So that's where more Gorilla had any connection to Jameson. He didn't do prime time. He didn't do any of the other stuff I did. And the first 2 years I was at WWF, I didn't go on the road. Everything I did was in the studio. Right. So, he wasn't there for the, we didn't work together, even though we had met and we'd spoken and all that. All right, who else?
Kevin Dunn I'm interested in, because there's so much stuff out there about Kevin Dunn that I don't think even people realize what his role is or what his importance is.
Okay. Who else was it? Because
Vince
I
McMahon,
might want to leave him for third.
the big one was Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I'd rather talk about Vince.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, not more than Kevin. Just Kevin's going to be more of a, especially the way you brought it up, there's a lot of stuff out there that I'm not aware of any of it. I'm going to just give you but getting to Vince, from the moment I first saw him live, which was at the show I was doing, from that moment, like I went up and introduced myself after the show, and he told me what a great job I did. I had visions of, well, maybe he'll call, which was a Saturday night. By Monday morning, believe me, I had forgotten that was even a chance when he did call or they did call. But always was a fan and in my corner, appreciative, generous. He was just the man. Now, I know there are people that don't have that take on him. And I think there's some justification for some of them feeling something, but never to me. And I wasn't around for any of that. All I know is me and Vince, and nothing but great. Vince and Hulk, once we were, one of the few tours I did was through Texas. And after the show, these guys went out every night, usually a strip club or, the whole cast and a good part of the crew. And that was not my thing. Like I wanted to just get back to the hotel. But there were times that like, Jameson, let's go. You come with me. Let's go. And there was actually right in front of me where Hulk was telling Vince, no, Jameson's riding with me. And Vince is like, no, Jameson, get in my van. Like that was so cool. Like I know. And here's the other thing that I feel really indebted to Vince over is that it started to become obvious to me that there were in Vince's creative team, I'm talking old school, in the wrestling business, 30, 40, 50 years, that helped him matchmaking and
his inner circle, basically.
Right. Now, for TV, and I'm going to give Kevin Dunn a mention right now. When I got there, I never dealt with anyone except Kevin Dunn in terms of what I was doing, what the storyline was, what the setup was, because we were never given scripted lines. It was all improv. But these guys were awesome. And they set me up so well in so many of these episodes. But once primetime ended and everything was shot on the road and I had a tour, the other guys were more involved, storylines. And I know of, some dissension among the old school guys that Jameson doesn't really belong. And Vince always, he it's almost like he disregarded that because he was always looking for something somewhere for me to fit in. And, I know he thinks I was talented and brought a different element. Like, I know he always appreciated what I did. And that was great. And it wasn't just that I love him for, but it was just how he treated me and did his part to make me fit in because, I'm in a dressing room with, guys that are very unlike me. I was not a behemoth athlete. But there were a bunch of people that reached out and made me feel comfortable. And there were a few that kind of let, what are you doing here? Not that anybody ever confronted me and said, what are you doing here? But that made it just feel, you could just tell by the looks. and all that.
That's kind of Vince in a nutshell, though. Always kind of thinking ahead and thinking of things that can be different, that can make his show better too. And
Yeah.
I think the dissent you'll hear from the old timers then is the same dissent you'll hear from certain old timers now for new ideas that happen too. So I think it's just kind of the way
Yeah.
that
And,
wrestling
and,
works.
and nobody ever, in the old school, there was one guy who just made it obvious that set me more on the thought of, trying to get a better read on people to see what might be up for me, because I wasn't happy traveling. I really wasn't. I couldn't do any other acting. I couldn't audition because, and thankfully that only lasted, 3/4 of a year, maybe 7, 8, 9 months. I don't know. But it was just not. And again, I was at a time in my life where it was an acting gig for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be a millionaire from it. It wasn't like it was like, look at me, I'm buying a boat. Or it was a good payday, but it was all I could do. And, having said that, I kind of try to concentrate on what future I might have there, or what, and, was really happy that we came to a mutual decision that, yeah, I need to go do this play off Broadway, or it was, and what's so cool? I told you I'm moving. I found a box that I haven't opened in probably 6 or 7 years, and I found my actual release letter.
Oh wow!
The original, signed by J.J. Dillon, and then I found a contract signed by Vince McMahon, and I found my wrestling license and the medical exam that got me my wrestling license, and all this original great stuff. When I was there was this guy, Michael, I'm not sure, Feinberg, I think,
Okay.
who was, I think, a comedy producer genius. He was so responsible for the comedy, and I would say I started there in '89. He had to be there a couple of years already, and he left while I was there. And Kevin was his second in command, was his assistant producer. I think he had a better title than assistant producer, but whatever. But Kevin was great. Kevin totally bought into everything Michael was proposing, and Kevin he was a great communicator. He was definitely one of those guys that you want to make laugh, but also it had like the team spirit kind of thing where, yeah, do that. Like, was very, what's the word I'm trying to use? He was very
motivating.
Say again?
Motivating.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way of that, if you did something that he thought was really funny, you felt good about it and knew it was funny, because he was not just anybody's. So anyway, Kevin was a really good second guy when I got there. But Michael was probably like did the bulk of the idea work. Kevin was great buying in and adding to it and all that stuff. So when Michael left, suddenly there was this void of ideas. And there were a couple of episodes that we shot that where Kevin was, almost fighting for his life, and really relying on me and whoever else was on that night to come up with our own things. And there was one bit he did that was just involving me that was just not, wasn't really that I wasn't quite sure where the humor in it was, and it just didn't come off well. But he was young and very new to having to be that guy.
Yeah.
That was totally responsible for what was going out on the air. And when I first heard, it's probably about 10 years later, I'm going to say the early 2000s, that he was, what do they call it? But he was the head of television.
He's the executive producer.
He's the guy now.
Yeah.
And he has been for a while. And when I heard that, I felt really good because I know he's capable. He was just thrown into a very unexpected jam. And, I think he's probably had some, what I'm sure it's ruled his life, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's a job you got to live with, not so much downtime, because vacations with family, your mind is only 50-50 at that point. 50 with the family, 50 still with the job. And that's just life in the WWF.
Yeah.
So in that, I hope he got everything else out of life that he wanted to. I loved him. I still do. I mean, I got no reason to stop loving him just because we don't see each other anymore. But I so rooted for him in those early weeks. And then, boom, we were right. It was only a few weeks. And then we were in Raw. And Raw was probably easier for him to be the boss, the creative boss at that time, because it wasn't so much the old timers were creating the matchups and the storylines and all that, and he just had to work on promos and stuff. And I was really rooting for him, and I'm so happy he's where he is, and I hope he got everything out of life besides that.
Yep.
All
right. We're going to move to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 relatively quick questions and your answers. So first question, other than Jameson, what role made you the proudest to perform?
Augie in a film I did, a short film that won a bunch of film festivals, and I was the lead character, and I got an audience award. What do they call that? Audience Choice Award at Steve Buscemi's Film Festival, and it was a really good role, and that's the first thing that comes to mind.
What was the character?
He was a barber, approaching middle age, late 30s, and it was just a barbershop where friends congregate, and there's a twist to my character's put on the spot. Why aren't you marrying Kim? And there's this whole twist where he's set up to propose to this girl because he thinks he's going to lose her, but it's an illusion. It's something they set up. It's like a scam. And turns out I knew the scam was going on all along. But anyway, that's let me tell you about the film I'm most proud of.
Okay.
Can I add this?
Yeah.
All right. So about right before COVID, the December before COVID. So I guess that's 2019.
Yep.
Christmas 2000. Okay. So James, my son actor, that was Little Johnny in Extreme Rule, successful acting career. He's cast as the lead in this high budget film that was independent, that was shooting in LA and before COVID, but they didn't want to fly him in for a short film for the auditions. They would Skype with him. They saw him in an episode of a great show called Rami on, I think it's Hulu. They saw him he was a guest star, and they said, that's our kid. So they hire him, and they say, James, your resume is unbelievable. Who do you study with in New York? And he said, well, my dad's an actor. He's the only coach I ever had. And they said, wow, that's great. We didn't hire the actors yet to play your father or your uncle in the film. Send us his picture, and we will let him audition. So he sends my picture in, and the guy tells James, tell your father to read for the grandfather. That was my grandfather's story. And I got the role, and we shot it. And COVID really, to go from, wrapping production to when the film was actually released, the filmmaker is Australian. And after he wrapped, he went home for Christmas, and suddenly we were in lockdown. He couldn't leave the country and for like a year. And then it was like, if he left the country, he wouldn't be able to get back in.
Right.
So the film was just released this summer, the end of the summer, and got picked up by the Toronto Film Festival, which is huge. It's like the third largest in the world. And it actually got nominated for Best Dramatic Short. And I was so happy with what I did. I'm only in like 2 or 3 scenes, but James kills it. He kills it. It's a sad movie. It's about, how they happen to use an Italian-American family, but it's not uncommon, showing how abuse is passed down generation to generation. And what this 13-year-old kid does to try to put a stop to the cycle. And I play the grandfather, so I was an abuser, and I abused my son, who is James' father, and he abuses James. And good cast. What's
the name of the film if people want to check it out?
It's called I'm on Fire, and the father is played by Lilo Brancato, who's a great actor. He was, as a child, he was Robert De Niro's son in A Bronx Tale, and he was on The Sopranos. And James' mother is played by Jamie Lynn Sigler, who was
also on Sopranos.
Sopranos, yeah. She was Meadow.
Right.
So real good cast, and I play her father-in-law, his father, and it's a beautiful film. It's really cool, and that is probably my second favorite character.
We're going to make that the second part of the 3 count, because that was better than anything I had on my notes here. Last question: if you could recast John DiGiacomo in the WWE, what would you see yourself doing? What kind of personas are they missing that you would be able to perform, or would have been able to perform, 25 years ago?
You mean if I continued there?
If you weren't Jameson, what else? What other kind of character could you be there?
I think it's so funny. Jameson, I swear to you, is the only character I ever played as a nerd, as a goofy guy. I got a lot of auditions because of my success there. Never booked anything as a nerd or as this pathetic human being. But one of the things that, it's so funny that, like, what I got cast as was this like rough mafia, Spanish drug lord or drug cartel but tough guy. I was in really good shape. I mean, I was really cut, and when I was doing Jameson, and it was so not who I was. I mean, I could do when we went live to the arenas, I could do my Jameson thing, go to the dressing room, take a shower, and come out as John, and nobody ever knew it was the same guy. But I think I could have been definitely not a wrestler, as in shape as I was. You know, I was like 165 pounds. But as a manager, as like either a mafia type or you know, I like Razor Ramon strikes me that I could have been his Spanish manager, like yeah, but more Italian,
Yeah.
anything like that, play that mafia guy, but funny, and you know, toothpick in the mouth, and yeah, well, where do you see what we do, you know, that kind of thing. I think I could have done that for them.
I think so. I think a dark side of Jameson would have been a fun eventual turn to kind of like Jameson finally snaps at all the people who were picking on him all those years,
Yeah,
and decides to just kind of turn another way. So
yeah, you know, yeah, go ahead.
no, oops, there goes my audio. So we had it for the whole time, but I was just going to wrap. John, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining
Oh,
me
buddy,
today on Under the Ring Pro
listen,
Wrestling Conversations.
this was great. This is one of the best ones of these I ever did. You know, sometimes I forgot you were in the room because I couldn't shut up.